What's up everyone, welcome back to the Carnarium. I'm Waste and I've got another video for you today. We're going to do a box opening of the brand new Worldshaper Precon Commander deck from the most recent set, Edge of Eternities. This Precon is a Jund lands deck that focuses around a unique mechanic, land sacrifice. I love Jund and I love sacrifice decks, so I'm stoked for this Precon. So let's jump right in. Let's open up the Worldshaper Precon, see what comes in the box, and what brand new cards Wizards cooked up for this sweet new Jund land sacrifice deck. But real quick, if you like this kind of content and you want to see more of it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you like playing Commander and you want to play against me in a video on the channel, join the official Waste MTG Discord, where you can talk all things EDH with other viewers from the channel and play Commander with me. Links in the video description. Alright, today's a super cool day because we get to do an unboxing of the new Magic the Gathering, Edge of Eternities, Worldshaper Commander Precon. Now I'm excited about this particular Precon, not only because it's a new Precon, so we get to crack it open, check out the new cards, not only because it seems like a really cool deck with a unique strategy, but because this is actually the first Precon that I've ever bought for myself. Yes, in the many years of me playing this game, I've actually never bought a Commander Precon. No specific reason why, I just kind of always built my own decks, but this one, when I saw it spoiled, something drew me to it, and I knew that I would need to pick one of these up for myself. Maybe we'll unpack that as we do the unboxing. But first, without further ado, let's go ahead and crack this open and see what's inside. So as with all Precons, it comes in this standard box with the art on the front, the name of the deck, and it's usually open on the side here with some kind of pull tab. We got some information on the back, which you can read if you want to, but it's pretty much just a box that has the contents inside, so let's go ahead and open it. Somewhat carefully. I was hoping to get a clean rip there. It's telling us to make some earth-shattering plays here, so we'll try our best. Let's go ahead and open it and see what's inside. Let's pull out all the stuff. Let's see, that's everything in there. Put that aside. Alright, so looks like we got the deck itself with the face commander. We'll go over that in a sec. Some kind of pamphlet, maybe, let's see, playing the deck, going over some of the rules, commander rules, some of the color identity stuff, little pamphlet poster, put that off to the side, some kind of pack, let's see, what does it say? Collector Booster Sample Pack. Okay, it feels very thin, so there's probably only like 1 to 3 cards in here. And then this little guy, whatever this is, looks like I fold it out. Okay, it's like a box. Okay, maybe it's a deck box, like a little paper one. I'm trying not to rip it. Seems easy to do. Okay, there we go. Push that down. Alright, look at that. So I imagine this fits 100 sleeved cards. It seems too thick. Like if we pop out the actual deck here, it seems a little too thick for just the deck, right? But if you sleeve these up, I imagine it would fill out the rest of the space. So maybe, you know, this is for 100 sleeved cards. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. I would not recommend rocking this anywhere other than your house, but it is cool that they give you a little option to take your deck somewhere. Just don't take it outside of your house with this. Put this off to the side. Alright, and then this is just a holder for the deck. There's nothing else in here. Some tokens here. Looks like a +1/+1 counter. I'm not sure what these represent, but we'll probably figure it out as we unpack the cards and read the different mechanics, but they're for something, so we can punch those out and use them as counters. Alright, so the meat and potatoes of the contents. We have the actual deck, which has all the cards, and then we have this Collector Booster Sample Pack. So let's go ahead and just open this and get it out of the way, see what's inside. Try to do this gently because it's it's very thin, like I said. I can't really get a good grip on it like I could a normal pack. Alright, there we go. We did it. Cool, extra suspense. The card is face down. Oop, popped right out. Alright. So what do we got here? Looks like some kind of information card. Secret layer advertisement. Alright. And then we got 2 cards here. Alright. So, sorry if I butcher these names. Helia, Guided by Light. Legendary creature, human soldier, so it can be your commander. Whenever Helia or another creature or artifact you control enters, you gain 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card if you've gained 3 or more life this turn, and then you can warp it for 1 white mana. Warp is a new mechanic in this set where you can play the card for the warp cost. It comes into play, and then at the end step of your turn, it goes back, I believe, into exile, where you can then pay its normal cost. I can't remember if it goes back into your hand or into exile, but I think it's exile. And then you can play it from exile for its normal cost, but you get the effect, whatever the text box, you get that effect on the turn that you warp it down. So this would warp down, I paid 1 white mana, right? Maybe on turn 1 or 2. I do the things on the card to get the value, and then at the end of my turn, it pops back into exile, and then I can play it later on. Pretty cool effect. It's kind of like Evoke, if you're familiar with Evoke, except instead of sacrificing, it comes back. So it's like upgraded Evoke. Cool, very cool. This seems like a specialty art too. So, and it's foil, so we'll have to look that guy up. But very cool. And then we got Broodguard Elite, which is X green. This creature enters with X +1/+1 counters on it. When this creature leaves the battlefield, put its counters on target creature you control, and then you can warp it for X. So obviously we just talked about warp with Helia. This works the same way. You can warp it for X and a green. It comes into play with that many +1/+1 counters, and then when it leaves the battlefield, which it would at the end of turn with warp, you can put those +1/+1 counters on another creature. So good with +1/+1 counter strategies. Any creature that wants +1/+1 counters, there's a lot of them out there. Lots of different strategies with +1/+1 counters in green. So 2 very cool cards, 2 very cool showcases of the type of mechanics in the new set. Really cool art. I think they did a tasteful job with the sci-fi. I was really hesitant with this. This is the first space set in Magic, and I was really hesitant about what the art would look like, but it's really tastefully done. Like, I mean, you can see there's a spaceship right there, but it's like, it's just a little detail in the background. I mean, maybe they're standing on an asteroid or something. It's not really super clear, but honestly, this art could really fit in any Magic the Gathering set that I can think of from the past. And same with this guy. I mean, there's nothing particularly sci-fi about this. Maybe like the insect, you know, humanoid creature, but this isn't too far away from the normal art you would see in Magic the Gathering. So I appreciated that they did it tastefully. So anyway, 2 cool cards. Let's move on to the actual deck. Alright, so here's the actual Commander Precon deck. And the face commander of this Precon is Hearthhull the Worldseed, as you can see here. But first, let me get this plastic wrap off so we can see the cards better. Alright, cool. So, now that we got the plastic wrap off, this is Hearthhull the Worldseed, which is 1 black, red, green. It's a new type of permanent called a spacecraft, which is a artifact, and it has some new abilities. So, even though this is a legendary artifact, it can be your commander. They updated the rules with this new set where anything that has a, sort of like vehicles, anything that has a power and toughness on the front and is also legendary can be your commander. So this also applies to vehicles, and since spacecraft are basically a new version of vehicles, it applies to spacecraft as well, because they said that they wanted spacecraft to be able to be your commander. So they updated that clause so that spacecraft could be your commander. So this spacecraft, what it does is it has these abilities on the side, 2+ and 8+. These are essentially crew costs if you're familiar with vehicles and how crew works. If you're not, crew essentially means you have a artifact that can turn into a creature, and you have to tap creatures that you have for their power. So like, let's say I had 2 1/1 creatures and I needed a crew 2, or like for example this is 2+, I have to tap those 2 creatures, right, for a total of 2 power, and then I could crew the vehicle, or in this case I permanently get this +2 effect, right? Now this is called stationing, and you can only do it at sorcery speed, unlike crew on vehicles where you could do it at instant speed. So at sorcery speed, meaning in one of my main phases, either my first or second main phase, I need to tap a creature where the total power of the creature or creatures tapped is 2 or more, right? It can be a 3/3, right? That would still get me here. It would get me to level 3, right? But it would turn on my 2+ here. Once I get that turned on, it's permanent. It's on forever, okay? I don't have to keep doing it. But it turns on this ability, which is pay 1, tap, sacrifice a land, draw 2 cards. You may play an additional land this turn. So that's the whole theme of this deck, sacrificing lands to gain value. So this commander specifically sacrifices lands to draw cards and then gives you an extra land drop. So ideally you have a lot of lands in your deck. You're never going to go down a land because you'll sacrifice a land, make 2 land drops, right? So the math will always allow you to make your land drop for the turn and get a land ahead. Then, if you get late enough in the game, you can tap a total of 8 power worth of creatures to turn this into an actual creature. This 2+ doesn't turn it into a creature, it's still just an artifact, right, off to the side. But if you get 8 or more crew power or station power, then it turns into a flying vigilant haste 6/7 with whenever you sacrifice a land, each opponent loses 2 life. Now, there's a lot of ways you could upgrade this deck, but just off the top of my head, Scape Shift is one of the ways that you could upgrade this deck, right? Or Zurin Orb, where you just sacrifice all your lands. There's a lot of different effects like this, but theoretically, if you get this ability turned on where whenever you sacrifice a land, each opponent loses 2 life, and then you sacrifice a ton of lands, you could just kill the table, especially as it gets late in the game, because in my experience, turn 7, 8, 9 in Commander, if you get that far, generally people are around 20 life, so you really only need to sacrifice around 10 lands. It's not a huge ask, and if you're going to kill everyone at the table, you don't care about all your lands going away, right? Because you'll just win the game at that point. So it's a really powerful ability if you build around it. Okay, so that's the commander. It's a very beautiful card. I love the art. Like I said, it's a space set, but I feel like they did it tastefully. This isn't like really, you know, off the charts, like doesn't feel like a Magic card. It does to me feel like a Magic card. So I appreciate, you know, I just want to make sure I'm clear. I really appreciate the lengths that they went to make this a space set that was tastefully done in the Magic universe, right? Okay, next card. Oh yeah, just look at the foiling. Hold on, I'm just gonna this is the commander, so I'm gonna spend a little bit more time talking about it, but just look at the foiling. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, moving on. And again, I'm gonna mispronounce all these names because they're new cards and I've never heard anyone else say them, so bear with me. Satsarel, Genesis Shepherd. So 2 Jund, legendary creature, insect druid, flying. You may play lands from your graveyard. Already a super good ability. And then whenever you sacrifice another non-token permanent during your turn, you may put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to Satsarel's power onto one other target creature. So we're going to sacrifice lands with our commander, right? So whenever we sacrifice a land, we're going to be able to put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to this creature's power on another creature. I can't put it on this creature. It has to be a different creature. But his power is already at 2. If we have ways to make his power grow, then that number will grow. But just as a base level, we'll be putting 2 +1/+1 counters on another creature. Really good with our commander since we're going to be sacrificing lands. It also, like we talked about, lets us play lands from our graveyard. So we'll be able to sacrifice a land, draw 2 cards, then play an additional land on our turn when we can play the land that we just sacrificed to get the draw effect. So now you can see how the engine is going to start going just between these 2 cards, right? All right, let's move on. Eumidian Wastewaker. 2 black creature insect cleric. Whenever this creature attacks you and defending player, each discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. You draw a card for each land card put into a graveyard this way. And then has Encore for 8, which Encore means later on I can exile it from my graveyard. I put a token copy of this on the battlefield for each opponent. So let's just say I still have 3 opponents. I'd put 3 token copies of this. They all have haste, and I can attack each one of those players with the token copy. And then I believe it sacrifices. Yeah, it sacrifices at the beginning of the next end step, which is nice because this deck cares about sacrificing, right? This card's really good. I mean, I don't like that it gives the player the choice to discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. I'd prefer it just made them sacrifice a permanent because that would work better with our strategy. But we get to draw a card for each land card put in the graveyard, so we'll sacrifice a land. They probably won't sacrifice a land. There's not going to be many players who want to sacrifice a land, but you know, we'll still get value because they'll have to sacrifice something or discard a card. So that's definitely bad for them and good for us, right? So we break the symmetry of this card with our deck. Evendo Brushrazer. 2 in a red. Creature insect warrior. Whenever you sacrifice a non-token permanent, exile the top card of your library. During your turn, as long as you've sacrificed a non-token permanent this turn, you may play cards exile with this creature. And then we can tap, sacrifice a land, add red to our mana pool. So again, another great synergy piece with our deck because it says whenever we sacrifice a non-token permanent. It doesn't say lands specifically, although lands are non-token permanents 99% of the time. But anytime we sacrifice anything that's a non-token, we get to essentially draw a card. Now it is impulse draw, right? But the thing is, impulse draw normally goes away, right? You exile the top card of your library, it goes away at your end step, or until your next end step, you can play that card, but then it goes away. But with this card, it sticks around in exile where we can play it for as long as this card is on the battlefield, and as long as we've sacrificed something the turn that we want to play something from exile with this card, if that makes sense. So we're kind of like storing cards away with this card every time we sacrifice a non-token permanent, and then as long as we've done that on our turn, which again this deck is going to be doing every turn, that's the whole point of the deck, we get to play cards that we've exiled with this creature. So they don't go away. It breaks away from the normal mold of impulse draw, where impulse draw is this, like, you know, tempo effect where you want to play it right away, otherwise it's going to go away forever. Now obviously if this card gets removed, all those cards in exile get permanently stuck in exile. But as long as this card's on the battlefield, all those cards that we've exiled with it, we can play them on any of our turns since we're sacrificing stuff all the time. And then on top of that, it has a way to sacrifice lands stapled onto it, so we can tap and sack a land, add red to our mana pool. So now if we have our commander at station 2, we have some of our other permanents down, we can sacrifice lands, draw cards, play lands from our graveyard, impulse draw, add double red to our mana pool, right? It just, you know, you can see how the engine is going to start stacking up. Like at first it seems like sacrificing a land would be something that you would never ever want to do, and that's kind of why I really like this precon. It's a cool direction that Wizards decided to go for this precon. I love when decks take things that you would normally never want to do. Like normally you would never want to sacrifice a land, and it turns it into a way to get value and eventually win the game. So all these cards stacked up together will eventually turn sacrificing lands into huge value gains for us. Alright, Planetary Annihilation, 3 red, sorcery. Each player chooses 6 lands they control, then sacrifices the rest. Planetary Annihilation deals 6 damage to each creature. So this has been kind of a hotly contested card about whether it's good for the format or not, because land destruction in general is frowned upon in Commander, right? No one wants to get Armageddon or anything like that. However, this is kind of a needed effect in my opinion in Commander. Now, I don't know if 6 lands is the right, you know, sweet spot, but what often happens in Commander is since land destruction, you know, mass land destruction is frowned upon, nobody plays it, right? So, and I've talked about this in other videos of mine, the ramp players take away and run off with games, right? You get the Simic ramp players, you get any kind of green ramp deck, and those players have double the amount of mana as everyone else, and they can just do twice as many things every turn, and eventually they just roll away with value. And since there's nothing keeping those decks in check, there's nothing that's allowed to keep those decks in check, eventually they kind of just win. That's why everyone sort of loathes, you know, Simic ramp decks, because they just ramp, steal all your permanents. They kind of don't have like a great way of winning the game. They just kind of like value, and eventually you just concede. Stuff like this will keep those types of decks in check, right? Now, again, I don't know if 6 is the right number, but just imagine this scenario. You're on turn 5, right? This costs 5 mana. The ramp player has double the amount of lands as everyone. Everyone else has 5 lands. The ramp player has 10, right? They're definitely in the lead because they have double the amount of mana, and they probably have ways to get even more mana, right? This kind of brings them back down to everyone else's level, right? So you cast this, you don't even have 6 lands yet, right? So they have to sacrifice down to 6, and everyone else doesn't even get affected, right? It's turn 5, you cast this, you just, you know, cut the ramp player at the knees, right? Here's another scenario. You're trying to win the game, right? You're trying to win the game with this precon. You have your commander stationed all the way to level 8, right? You have a lot of lands on the battlefield yourself, right? Remember, whenever you sacrifice a land, each opponent loses 2 life. So let's say you have a bunch of lands down, you have 14 lands, and you make everyone sack, including yourself, down to 6. Well, 14 lands, you would sacrifice 8 lands, that's 16 damage to everyone, right? So this can be used as a way to cut ramp players at the knees, and it can also be a way to win the game with this deck. So I will defend Planetary Annihilation. We'll see how it plays out over the next year or 2, but I think this effect is incredibly safe. Now, you know, outside of this deck, I think this kind of card has even more application, because if you're playing, you know, like a white catch-up ramp deck and you're playing bounce lands or lots of lands that tap for more than 1 mana, then this card gets even better, because you can sacrifice down to 6, but it really doesn't even affect you if you're a catch-up ramp player, because you have all these lands that tap for more than 1 mana. And so even though you only have 6 lands, you picked your best 6, and you actually probably can tap for double the amount of mana that your lands would normally produce because of the lands that you sacrificed down to, if that makes sense. Like your bounce lands tap for 2, your Lotus Fields tap for 3, your flip lands, you know, a lot of them tap for 2 or 3. And if you just count all those up, let's just say on average they each tap for 2, well then you have 6 lands, but you have 12 mana at your disposal, while everyone else only has 6 lands and 6 mana at their disposal. So these types of effects they're really versatile, and I'm really glad to see Wizards printing them in precons, because what that says to commander players is, if they're willing to put this in a precon, it means Wizards thinks that this is a totally acceptable type of effect, and they're gonna print more of them, and I really hope they do, because that's one of the loopholes in the commander format. I think Commander kind of self-regulates itself in most ways, but ramp decks, there hasn't been a great way to keep those types of decks in check, and this is a great way to keep those decks in check. So, really cool card, and then obviously doing 6 damage to each creature. It's a board wipe as well, so it really resets the board in most situations, and at 5 mana I think it's really well costed, so very cool effect. Next up, Baloth Prime, 3 and a green. Creature Beast, 10/10. This creature enters tapped with 6 stun counters on it. So that means that if a permanent with a stun counter would become untapped, instead remove one of those counters from it. And then whenever you sacrifice a land, create a tapped 4/4 green beast creature token and untap this creature. So again, whenever you sacrifice a land, you just create the beast and then take a stun counter off of it. And then for 4, you can sacrifice a land and gain 2 life, so it's another way to sacrifice lands. 4 is pretty steep, if you think about it, but especially compared to some of the other effects we have in here, there's usually 1 mana or no mana. It's just tap, sacrifice. So 4 is kind of a lot, but you know, you're going to be making 4/4s every time you sacrifice a land with this. It doesn't have to be untapped for that effect to happen, so you're going to be making those 4/4 tokens, and then if you do it enough times, if this survives, doesn't get wiped, you're eventually going to get a 10/10. So really cool creature. Definitely, probably never going to use the 4 mana effect on here just to gain 2 life, but in a pinch, I guess you could. But what's really good about this card is making the 4/4s, right? You sacrifice a land, you make a 4/4, right? That's really, really good. The 10/10 body could eventually be good. The sacrifice a land ability could eventually be necessary if you're getting board wiped a lot and this is the only thing you have left to sacrifice lands with. But pretty steep cost, not a lot of value just to gain 2 life. However, you do get to make that 4/4. So, cool card. Dig it. Alright, next up, Exploration Broodship. So 1 green, we have another spacecraft, so this is a new card. It can eventually become a 4/4, and it has 2 stations. So for 3, you can play an additional land on each of your turns. And then if you eventually get to 8, it turns into a flying 4/4. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a permanent spell from your graveyard by sacrificing a land in addition to paying its other costs. So this is a really cool card. This kind of showcases the versatility of the new spacecraft permanent type. So right off the bat, this is a really low cost, 1 green mana. This can come down on turn 1 if it's in your opening hand, right? We already talked about how playing additional lands is really great for this deck because we're going to be sacrificing lands, so we don't want to go down land count. So getting this up to 3, which is not a big cost, we can already play an additional land on each of our turns. But what's really good about this card is if you get it to level 8, because being able to play permanents out of your graveyard just by sacrificing lands and paying their costs is really good. Obviously, it synergizes with the rest of the deck, so I don't need to go over why sacrificing lands would be good. That's not a downside in this deck, it's a good thing. But being able to play permanents out of your graveyard is a really unique effect. Normally, green is good about getting permanent cards back into your hand, but it's not necessarily a reanimation color for permanents. That's more of white's thing. So it's kind of unique to see this effect on a green card, and having that ability in a precon is super sweet. I feel like this card's going to be sought after for lots of different decks because it kind of goes in everything that would want to be able, even just for value, as like a utility slot in a deck that's running green. I mean, why wouldn't you want to be able to cast permanents out of your graveyard, right? I mean, yes, you have to sacrifice a land, but most of the time, like if you're going to sacrifice a land to recast your Bolas's Citadel, I mean, you'll gladly do that, right? So this is an incredible effect. Well, both effects are really good, right? But the 8, the Station 8 is incredible. So super sweet card. I love that it can come down on turn 1 and you can start ticking up the stations. Really, really sweet. All right, next up, Horizon Explorer, 2 and a green. Creature Insect Scout, 2/4. Lands you control enter untapped. Already bonkers ability. If you guys are familiar with Prime Time and Amulet Titan in Modern, that whole deck revolves around Amulet of Vigor and making lands come into play untapped. So your bounce lands come into play untapped. All your Surveil lands and anything else that deck is running come into play untapped. Even just generic like dual lands that normally don't see any play because they come into play tapped, like all those cheap dual lands now come into play untapped, so they turn into OG dual lands. Insane ability. But wait, there's more. Whenever you attack a player, create a lander token. So this is a new token that came along with this set. It's super cool. It's a artifact that has 2 tap, sacrifice this token, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped. It's a rampant growth. It's a token that is an instant speed rampant growth. So rampant growth is pay 1 to green. It's a sorcery, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, right? This is the exact same effect, except it's a token that you can sack. You can pay 2 and sack it, right? You don't have to pay green. You can pay 2 generic, so 2 of any color. And you can do it at instant speed, which actually matters in landfall style decks. Now, this is not necessarily a landfall deck. It's like the opposite. It's like a land die deck. I don't even know if there's a term for it yet, but it's land sacrifice. We care about lands going to the graveyard, not lands necessarily entering. But this card is incredible. I mean, we talked about the last card having 2 good abilities. This card has 2 insane abilities. So lands entering untapped, we talked about, already nuts, right? Incredibly broken. But whenever you attack a player, create a land or token is really, really good. Obviously that lets us ramp, so that's great. Which gives us more lands that we can sacrifice. Lands that we didn't need to use our land drop for that turn, right? It's also something that we can sacrifice, right? We're sacrificing the token. Now, most of the cards we've read so far care about sacrificing non-tokens, so it doesn't really work with these. But there's lots of cards out there that just care about permanence being sacrificed. They don't care about non-token, token, or any of that kind of stuff. They just, anytime a permanent is sacrificed, right? Think of stuff like Mayhem Devil, right? Anytime a permanent is sacrificed. So this card has lots of potential, both in this precon and outside of this precon in other commander decks. This guy is going to be very, very popular in lots of different decks. I can definitely see it. But lands entering untapped is extremely, extremely good. Next up, Scouring Swarm. 1 black-green creature insect, 1/1 flying. Whenever you sacrifice a land, create a tapped token that's a copy of this creature if 7 or more land cards are in your graveyard. Otherwise, create a tapped 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. So this is kind of like Scoot Swarm's Black Sheep cousin, right? So instead of lands entering, creating tokens that are copies, it's whenever we sacrifice a land. Works basically the same way, just for land sacrifice, right? And then as we sacrifice lands, those copies each copy each other, and it becomes this exponential growth, right? If you have one of these, then you have a copy in one of these, right? And then each of those makes a copy. So that's 4 now. And then each of those makes a copy, which is 8. And then it just keeps going and going. And it doesn't take very much, at least in my experience with Scoot Swarm, to get to 300 plus tokens, right? So it may be a little bit more difficult with sacrificing lands versus landfall, right? There's a lot more effects that put lands on the battlefield, like lander tokens. But there aren't a lot of effects that sacrifice lands. Now, again, this whole deck is revolving around that, but it still might be hard to get to like 300. Now, I could easily see this getting up to like 30 something, right? Which is still awesome, because unlike Scoot Swarm, these have flying. So these are evasive, making them slightly better. Scoot Swarm is one of the greatest token creators of all time, but if we're just talking pound for pound, token for token, these are actually better because they have evasion built in. So really good in this deck. Definitely a cool finisher. I like that they made it inverted Scoot Swarm. Very, very cool. And I love that they have flying. It matters. It matters in the late game. If someone has 20 life and they've got a bunch of blockers on the battlefield, and you can make 30 tokens that have flying, again, you can sacrifice lands at instant speed, so they might not see it coming, and all of a sudden you swing out for with 31 ones and they don't have any flyers to block, or they only have 1 flyer but you still take 29. I mean, that's lethal, right? So flying matters, evasion matters. So really cool creature, super sweet in the deck. Next up we have Eumidian Hatchery. It's a land. We can pay 1 life to add black and then put a hatchling counter on this land. When this land is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, for each hatchling counter on it, create a 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. So, we talked about how we are going to have to sacrifice lands. This is a land that if we get down early in the game, maybe we get somewhere between 5 to 7 counters on it, and then eventually we sacrifice it, we get a bunch of insects with flying. Not bad value, right? And then with some of our other effects, we can play it out of our graveyard, do it again. So it's slow, but it gives us something back for sacrificing it, so that's pretty cool. And outside of this deck, if you're in like a proliferate deck, right, you could put 1 hatchling counter on here and then just proliferate a million times and find a way to sacrifice it, and put 50, 100 hatchlings, black insects on the battlefield. So really, really good. And again, there's no sorcery speed clause here, so if you sacrifice this on someone's end step and you have 100 counters on here, you make 100 black insects and then you untap, and now you have essentially you know, 100/1/1 black insects that can all attack that turn. So there are ways to break this. I don't think in this deck, in this Precon, we're going to get there, but definitely a cool land, and definitely something to keep an eye out for other decks in the future. Alright, next up we have Festering Thicket. So this is a new land. They completed the cycle for both these and the basic matters dual lands. I don't know if they have an actual name. I think they do, but I don't remember what they're called. These are the ones that cycle for 2. They have both types, so it's a swamp and forest, meaning it's fetchable with a lot of different effects, but specifically fetch lands, right? So that's really sweet. Fetch lands, by the way, would be an insane upgrade for this deck, because any deck that self-sacrifices, right? Because this deck cares about lands going to the graveyard, lands being sacrificed. Well, fetch lands sacrifice themselves and get you value. So that would be an automatic upgrade for this deck. And if you include lands like this that have both types, you can go and get these out of your deck. You can fetch for them. Also, if you draw this later on with your commander's ability to tap and draw some cards, and you don't need the land, you can cycle it for 2 and draw a card. So really, really versatile. They didn't have all of this cycle done, and this one and some other ones completed the cycle. So this is actually a brand new land. Gavin Verhey did a whole video on it. He just said that it's not that these are overpowered, but they didn't know where to print them. They didn't want to put them in standard again, so they found that putting them into precons was the best way to print them and complete the cycle, and I think that's great. So, you know, I've been missing these Golgari dual lands because the Golgari ones have been out of the cycle this entire time, and they finally printed them, and here they are. So very, very cool. Not like they're overpowered or anything. It's just nice to have the cycle complete, have some inexpensive, you know, fetch land targets, right? Okay, moving on. Here's the other dual land that I was talking about. So again, it's a swamp and a forest, and it enters the battlefield untapped if we have 2 or more basic lands. So not a hard clause to hit, especially in a precon that's going to have a lot of basics. But in a lands deck in general, you're going to have a fair amount of basics just to fill in all your land slots, and having 2 or more basics is a really minimal clause to hit. So in my experience, you know, most of the time when I play these and I fetch for them, like by turn 5 or so, you have 2 basics essentially, and they come into play untapped almost 99% of the time. Obviously, in the early game, if you have this in your opening hand, it's going to always come into play tapped, right? You don't have enough basics yet. But as the game progresses, they become even better and better fetch targets because they don't hurt you. It's not like they come into play and you have to take, you know, 2 life or whatever, like your shock lands. So they basically are, you know, incredibly cheap. I think these guys run like $1, right? For in all the different color pairings, they have a version of this now. And they're just great fetch targets. So I run them all the time in builds where I'm trying not to break the bank. I'm trying to stay within a budget. They're great fetch land targets because, like I said, by turn 5 or so, 4 or 5, whatever, depending on how many basics you're running in a deck, they almost always come into play untapped. Very, very reliable. And even early game, I mean, you play it and it's just a tap dual land, so it's still good. But very, very, very good. And I'm glad, like I said, they completed the cycle. Here they are, you know, both right here, both Golgari lands. These didn't exist a few weeks ago. They had the Rakdos one, and they had the Gruul ones, but they didn't have these Golgari ones. So, you know, if we're talking about the Umbrella of Jund, right? You can run those color pairings and fetch lands, and they didn't have these until now. So very excited to have these. Again, neither of these are like incredibly exciting on their own, but the value they add to your deck is very tangible. So very, very cool. Next up we have Fabled Passage. We just kind of discussed fetch lands. So Fabled Passage is a fetch land for basics. As long as we have 4 or more cards, when we crack this, the basic we search for comes into play untapped. If we don't, it comes into play tap. Not a big deal if we're doing this on an early turn. There's lots of times where I have this on turn 1 or 2 and I just play it to color fix, right? Being able to go get any color basic out of my deck is still incredibly good. That's why this card is, you know, maintained $5 to $10 since it was originally printed in Eldraine. But I'm glad to see it reprinted and put in a precon. I wish they would reprint more expensive lands into precons or other commander products, because the prices of lands is insane. It's just so expensive to build a mana base now, even on a, you know, if you're doing it the budget way. And Fabled Passage is just such an easy target for that, because it's getting basics. It's not like an OG dual land or something crazy like that. It's not reserve list or anything like that. But because it gives so much value, it's, you know, it's expensive. Expensive for budget players, right? So nice to see it reprinted in here. Very good include. And like we talked about, any land that sacrifices itself to go get you something, right? That fits right in the strategy of this deck. You don't have to do anything. I mean, you don't have to have another permanent that sacrifices lands. This literally sacrifices, and we get a sacrifice land trigger just from this doing its normal job. So very cool, very good include in the deck. Thanks Wizards for reprinting this. Appreciate it. Alright, next up we got Braids Arisen Nightmare. This came out in Dominaria, I believe, or one of those sets. But they reprinted it here in this precon, and this is another card that has essentially maintained its value over time. It's just such a cool commander. Man, if this card was Rakdos, it would probably be my favorite commander ever, because it's it's just so good. 3 mana, legendary creature Nightmare, 3/3. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. Essentially a permanent, right? I can't, I guess Battles is another permanent that we can't sacrifice, but essentially all the main permanents that you could think of, right? If we sacrifice one of those, right, we get some value. So if you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent of their choice that shares a card type with it. So if we sacrifice an artifact, they can choose whether or not to sacrifice an artifact that they control. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So let me just tell you how this normally works. We have Braids. We sacrifice something, right? No one else wants to sacrifice anything. So we end up drawing 3 cards, and each of those opponents loses 2 life, right? So Braids, for 3 mana, in a sacrifice deck, which already wants to sacrifice stuff, right? We can sacrifice lands with this. This deck wants to sacrifice lands for value. Nobody else is going to want to sacrifice their lands, right? So this reads in our deck, we sacrifice a land, we get value off of that, right? Even without this card. Then we also draw 3 cards because no one else will want to sacrifice lands, and we drain our opponents for 2 each. Incredible value. Incredible value. This card is stupid good. It's so good. I love the design. I love pretty much everything about it, because I mean, you know, if this was made 10-15 years ago, it would force the opponents to sacrifice what we sacrificed, like kind of like original Braids or something like that. But this is a modern day Magic card, so instead of making them sacrifice stuff, instead it gives them the choice, which is, you know, we would prefer to make them sacrifice stuff. That's much more mean, but it does make them think, like, okay, will I sacrifice my artifact, or will I allow them to draw a card and I lose life, right? That value is going to stack up. I mean, if we're doing this every turn, that's, you know, we drew a card for the turn, we maybe drew some cards off our other effects, we sacrifice a land, drew some cards, and we're going to draw 3 off the table and drain everyone and do 6 to the table. That's, at some point, that's got to stop, right? They can't just let that happen over and over again. So I've seen people let it happen for a turn or 2, and then all of a sudden, like, you sacrifice a creature and they're like, you know what, I have to sacrifice a creature. I can't let you keep drawing cards. Like, it's too much value. So this card's insane. Like I said, I wish it was Rakdos, because God, it would just be so sick. It would be the perfect commander for me if it was Rakdos, but still a sweet card in mono black, and I will probably at some point just make a deck around this card, because it is just, it's like my dream deck, you know? Like, again, I bought this precon, I kind of alluded to it in the intro, but I bought this precon because it was a cool Jund sacrifice deck where we were sacrificing lands, right? And that's something that normally you would never want to do, but this deck turns that into value, and I think that's so cool. So I bought this precon. basically just because I thought it was such a cool deck. But there's also a bunch of cards in here like Braids that I want for other decks, so I'll probably play this as a Precon, put the cards in other decks, play those decks, put them back in this, and when I want to play the Precon again. So it gives me a Precon for those bracket 2 games where people really just want to play straight Precons, which I didn't have before this. Now I actually have a Precon that, you know, if I show up at a bracket 2 table, I can say, yeah, give me a sec, let me put my cards back in, and here we go. I have a literal bracket 2 deck. Very, very cool. But Braids is insane value. Insane value, can be your commander because it's legendary. So this was a card I didn't have before, and now I do. So very excited about Braids. Next up is God Eternal Bantu, 3 black, legendary creature zombie god, 5/6. This originally came out in Amonkhet, I believe, or maybe it was Hour of Devastation, but one of those sets. And this guy is very similar to Braids in the way that it works. So I was going to build, again, this is another commander I wish was Rakdos because that would just be so sick, but they work similarly. So Menace, when God Eternal Bantu enters, sacrifice any number of other permanents, then draw that many cards. So unlike Braids where it's incremental, right? We play an artifact, we can sack it at the end of turn, draw 3 cards. You know, if no one else sacrifices artifacts. The way God Eternal Bantu kind of works is we want to build our board with a bunch of permanents and then play God Eternal Bantu and sacrifice however many we want and draw a card for each one of those. You know, preferably those, you know, permanents, you know, entering or going to the graveyard gives us value, so we get like additional value. Like there's lots of artifacts that enter, draw you a card. When they leave the battlefield, also draw you a card, like Ichor Wellspring and stuff like that. So that's the kind of stuff that God Eternal Bantu would want to do. And then when God Eternal Bantu dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it in its owner's library 3rd from the top. So this guy reshuffles back into our library 3rd from the top, and then in 3 turns or 3 cards, you know, probably because, you know, again, we can't sacrifice God Eternal Bantu with this ability. We can't play him and sack him to his own ability, but in a deck dedicated to sacrifice, it's probably going to be pretty easy to sacrifice God Eternal Bantu. So the way that it can work, if you build it right, is you play God Eternal Bantu, you sacrifice, let's just say 5 other things, then you use some other permanent to sacrifice God Eternal Bantu. So you can put him 3rd from the top, you draw 5 cards, one of those cards is God Eternal Bantu, and you just keep the engine going, right? Super cool card. Also just a great body, like a 5 mana 5/6 is really, really good with Menace. And it's something you don't care about dying because it just shuffles back into your library if you wanted to. Really, really cool card. So again, in this deck, it's a little interesting because, you know, maybe we use it as the win con to sacrifice all our lands, right? We trigger the damage clause that our commander gives when we station it. Up to 8, but in this deck it's a little interesting because we're not making a bunch of permanents. This deck isn't like a go wide token deck or a you know put a bunch of artifacts on the battlefield type of deck. We're sacrificing lands, so kind of an interesting include, but a really good card nonetheless. We'll see how the games play out, right? Maybe I'm not reading it right. Maybe we'll have more permanents than I thought. There was that card that made a bunch of 4/4s, right? When we sacrificed lands, so maybe we're going to make enough tokens where we get enough value where we play God Eternal Bantu. We can sacrifice just some of our tokens, maybe our lander tokens, our 4/4s, stuff like that. Draw some cards. Maybe we're not going to draw 10 cards because we're going to be we're not going to be sacrificing 10 things, but maybe we'll draw 5 cards because we sacrificed a couple of our auxiliary tokens and maybe a land or 2, right? Still really cool card. Good to see it reprinted. You know, these are both cards that were a little pricey, so nice to see it put it back in a Precon. Next up, Blasphemous Act, Commander All-Star. I'm sure you all know this card, but it is a 9 mana sorcery. It's never usually cast for 9 mana, and you'll see why in a sec. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. So in a game of Commander, you have, 4 players, 3 opponents, right? If each of them, each player has 2 creatures, right? That's already 8, right? Because 4 times 2 is 8. So it's really easy to get this down to 1 red mana, right? Most of the times I've seen this cast, it is just 1 red mana. And what it does is it deals 13 damage to each creature. So it is a, you know, it's a very red style board wipe. Instead of destroying all creatures, right, we're doing 13 damage to each, which is effectively the same thing. There aren't a lot of creatures that are, you know, have toughness bigger than 13. I've of course seen that happen where Blasphemous Act doesn't kill the 2020 or the, you know, the what, 1414, right? However, for all intents and purposes, Blasphemous Act 99% of the time wipes the board, and it's for only 1 red mana, so it's an incredibly good board wipe. Nice to see it reprinted here. I like keeping effects like this really low in cost. Every time they reprint something like this, it keeps the price low. I think this has stayed at like $1 over time, and it should stay that way. It is something that, you know, to me is as synonymous with Commander as Sol Ring, right? So cool to see it reprinted here. Definitely a great card. Next up we have Hammer of Perforos, 1 red, legendary enchantment artifact. Kind of interesting, it is an enchantment and an artifact. Not very many permanents are both, but this is both. Creatures you control have haste, then we can pay 2 and a red, tap, sacrifice a land, create a 3/3 colorless golem enchantment artifact creature token. So, gives our creatures haste, is also an outlet for us to sacrifice lands. We can make, you know, 3/3 golems when we sacrifice those lands. Again, paying 3 mana to sacrifice a land is a little bit steep. Normally, you know, 1 mana to me is already a little steep to sacrifice a land, but 3 mana is definitely very steep. But I guess, you know, if we have enough of these effects down, it just means that we're never gonna, you know, get board wiped and not have a way to do it, right? Since this is a enchantment artifact, it's not a creature, so like a normal Wrath is not going to get rid of this. So if we're trying to rebuild after a Wrath, we still have this on the board. We can still sacrifice lands. So yeah, and it gives all our creatures haste, which is never bad. So this is a cool effect. Nice to see it reprinted. Okay, next up we have Morag, Fury of Akum. I'm sure I butchered that name. Forgive me, but I don't know how to say that. 4 red, legendary creature, Minotaur Warrior, 6/6. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it is attacked this turn. And then landfall, whenever a land you control enters, if it's your main phase, there is an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. Essentially, we can have multiple combats with this card, right? And I believe with this card you can kind of break it and go infinite. I don't remember exactly how to do that, but because of the way it's worded, where it's like if it's your main phase as an additional combat phase, and with landfall, right, it's not hard to get multiple landfall triggers in a turn. So anyway, you can definitely have multiple combats, right? At least, you know, if you have a fetch land, just a fetch land, right? Land, right? Landfall, right? And then crack it, go get a land, right? Landfall. So, you know, that's 3 combats right there. Your normal combat and then another combat. So really good card. This card was getting pricey as well. I think it was, you know, past $10. So good to see it reprinted here. It fits generally in the theme because, you know, we're, you know, obviously all decks benefit off landfall. It's kind of the joke of landfall. Like, it's a mechanic that benefits you for just doing what you need to do to play the game, right? Play lands. But, you know, as we saw before, there's multiple permanents in this deck that allow you to play multiple lands per turn. So with, you know, those effects in conjunction with this, you can have maybe multiple combats like we talked about. So this is a really good card. Great finisher in the deck. Next up we have Augur of Autumn, 1 green. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands from the top of your library. And then Coven, as long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. So this allows us to look at the top card of our library, play lands from the top of our library, and then eventually turn on the ability to play creatures from the top of our library. I find that Coven is not hard to turn on with this, where we need to control 3 or more creatures with different powers. I mean, pretty much every creature I've shown you so far has different powers, so it's not that hard to do. And then you add in like the tokens, the 4/4s, the 3/3s and stuff like that. I mean, already, you know, just with this 2/3, this 6/6 and a 3/3, you have 3 creatures with different powers. So I find that most of the time when I play Augur of Autumn, Coven's already turned on just by playing the card. So in reality, this card allows you to play creatures and lands from the top of your library. Being able to see what's on top of your library is obviously very good. If you have a fetch land like a Fabled Passage and you don't like what's on top of your library, you can crack the fetch land. It makes you shuffle your deck so you get a new look to see what's on top of your library. Maybe you were trying to get a land or a creature and you shuffle into that. So really, really good card. In conjunction with additional land drops, obviously it's really, really good. So great engine piece for the deck. Centaur Vinecrasher, 3 and a green. Creature plant Centaur. It is a 1/1 with trample. This creature enters with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of land cards in all graveyards. And then whenever a land card is put into a graveyard from anywhere, you may pay green. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. So with our deck, we're sacrificing a bunch of lands. Let's say we have 5 lands in the graveyard. This enters with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. That's not to mention everyone else's graveyards, because fetch lands and just even like Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanses, those are pretty common in Commander. So this counts all graveyards. So if we have 5 lands and then maybe there's like 4 or 5 amongst the table of all of our opponents, then this enters with like 10 +1/+1 counters and has trample. So it's an 11/11 trample for 4 mana. Pretty good, right? Pretty good. And then whenever a land card is put into a graveyard from anywhere, we can pay mana and bring it back from our graveyard to our hand. So it kind of has a way to, resurrect itself, not directly to the battlefield, but back to our hand. And as the game continues, that number of lands and graveyards is just going to keep getting bigger, especially if we're, running effects like Planetary Annihilation, where we're going to make everyone sacrifice lands, right? This card just gets better and better as the game goes on. So cool creature. Having a big creature with trample is always good, right? Easy to just run over everybody. Forces people to block with their stuff. If there's a pesky planeswalker, you can just attack the planeswalker and they have to block, or just let the planeswalker die. So yeah, big creatures with trample, always good. And then having an ability on there where we can essentially always get it back into our hand if it goes into the graveyard, if it gets wiped or something like that, is really, really cool. So very good card, cool ability. Next up we have Formless Genesis, 2 and a green. This is a Kindred Sorcery Shapeshifter with Changeling. Kind of a lot of stuff going on there. Create an XX colorless Shapeshifter creature token with Changeling Death Touch, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard. Then it has Retrace. Retrace is an ability where we can discard a land card from our hand and then cast this card again. And there's no limit to that. Unlike Flashback, where it then goes to exile, we can do that over and over and over again if we want. So this essentially makes a big creature with Death Touch, where the creature's power and toughness is equal to the number of land cards in our graveyard. Kind of similar to Centaur Vinecrasher, where we put +1/+1 counters on it equal to that. This cares about land cards in our graveyard, but we can do it over and over again. So we can create a lot of tokens, right? Really cool card. Interesting ability with Retrace, because we can do it multiple times. So yeah, cool card. Very interesting that it is a Kindred Sorcery Shapeshifter Changeling. That's a lot of stuff. Bonecrafter Fawn, 2 and a green. When this creature enters, you may discard 1 or more land cards. When you do, return up to that many target non-land permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. So like I said, green is normally good at returning permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand, and this is an ability that sort of showcases that. So when this enters, we can essentially discard 1 or more land cards, and then we can put that many target non-land permanent cards from our graveyard into our hand. So it's a great way to recur stuff out of our graveyard. It does suck that we can't get lands. It would be really cool if we could discard like basic lands and get our fetch lands back from our graveyard. That would be sweet, but this specifically says non-land permanents. So we can't just like cycle our lands around, which is unfortunate. But we can get stuff back, which is always good. Maybe something got, you know, wiped in a board wipe. Maybe something got, you know, blown up that we need back. So this is a great way to get stuff back. And then it's a, you know, 3 mana 3/3, so not a bad body. Next up we have Multani Yavamaya's Avatar, 4 green, legendary creature elemental avatar. It's a 0/0 with reach, trample. Multani gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land card in your graveyard. So it counts both the land cards on the battlefield for yourself and the land cards in your graveyard. So with our deck, you know, this could easily be a 10/10 on average, right? If we have, you know, 6 lands on the battlefield, 4 lands in our graveyard, or some, you know, mishmash of those two numbers. So this card can definitely be big, and it's a reach trample, so it can block flyers, it can trample over other people's stuff, and then in addition to all that, we can pay 1 and a green, return 2 lands you control to their owner's hand, and then return this card from your graveyard to your hand. So we can bounce 2 lands to our hand, and then return this from our graveyard to our hand. So again, another way to get a creature back that might help us win the game later on. Returning 2 lands from our battlefield to our hand is kind of steep because we're not a landfall deck. Normally in a landfall deck that would be good because we get lands back in our hand that we can replay and get extra landfall triggers, but we want to sacrifice lands. So this is kind of a cost is what I'm trying to say. Like normally the return, you know, this card to your hand cost is kind of, it fits in the synergy of the deck. This doesn't exactly. Now we do have some landfall stuff in the deck, but the main theme of the deck is sacrificing lands, so it's kind of at odds with our main strategy. But this is a really cool creature, so maybe we're at a point in the game where it matters more to get this back in our hand than the 2 lands do, right? We can always tap the 2 lands for mana, then return them. It doesn't say untap lands, right? So we can get the mana out of them that turn, you know, maybe recast Multani, then we have a bunch of permanents to give us extra land drops so we can replay those lands. Maybe it's not as big of a cost as it seems at first, but it definitely isn't something you're just going to want to do on turn 4, right? Like, you know, I don't know why this would be in your graveyard anyway on turn 4, but just as an example, like, you're not going to want to go from 4 lands down to 2 lands with this effect. So just something to think about, but still a really, really good card. Speaking of really, really good cards, Oracle of Moldiah, 3 and a green. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. So another effect that gives us multiple land drops per turn. And again, those, if we have multiple of those types of effects, they stack up. So if we have this, another one, we actually get 3 land drops per turn, not just 2, right? So it's good to stack them up. Play with the top card of your library revealed. Another card that lets us look at the top of our library. And then you may play lands from the top of your library. So we get an extra land drop, we get to look at the top card of our library, and we can play lands from the top of our library. Incredible value. Incredible value. Really, really good in the deck. Good in landfall decks, obviously, but getting us extra lands on the battlefield is really good for sacrificing lands, right? Giving us extra land drops helps us play extra lands so that the sacrificing isn't as much of a detriment, right? And then if we get the ability to play lands out of our graveyard, you know, that all starts to come together to make it so that we're ramping way ahead than we would go down if we just were sacrificing lands by themselves. Really, really good card. Good to see it reprinted. Next up we have Pest Infestation, XX green, destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments, create twice X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens. With when this token dies, you gain 1 life. So removal for the deck, you know, if we want to blow up 1 artifact or enchantment, it's 3 mana, right? But it scales nicely because then, you know, 2 artifacts or enchantments is 5 mana, 3 is 7 mana, but then we get to create twice that many 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens. So the more mana we dump in this, the more of those tokens we get to create, and when they die we gain 1 life. So they gum up the tokens. They gum up the battlefield. They gain us life back when they die. So they're great blockers, and we get to blow up as many artifacts and enchantments as we want. We just have to pay a lot of mana to do it. So 3 mana, blow up something, or if we have a ton of mana later on from all of our ramping and extra land drops, we can blow up like all of our opponents' artifacts and enchantments and still get blockers out of it. So it's not like just a wasted turn where we did this at sorcery speed. Cool card. Rampaging Baloth, classic commander staple, 4 green, creature beast, 6/6, trample, landfall. Whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 green beast creature token. So they did sprinkle some landfall in this deck. We talked about that a little bit before. It's not the main strategy of the deck, but of course, any deck that cares about lands, it's good to have things that benefit off lands entering, because they have to enter before they die, right? So, and then we talked about all the extra land drops we're getting. So it's nice that they sprinkled some landfall in here, even though it's not the main strategy. And then again, creating 4/4s is always good. So this is a commander staple in any lands deck, because you can create an insane amount of 4/4s if you build around landfall. But we'll just get the extra value out of it in this deck just from all the extra land drops we'll be doing, and all the, returning lands from our graveyard to the battlefield and stuff like that. Those all trigger landfall. So, really good card in the deck. Next up, Splendid Reclamation. 3 and a green, sorcery. Return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tap. This card is really, really good in this deck. Obviously, when we sacrifice lands, they go to the graveyard, and then with this card, we can return all those lands to the battlefield, which then triggers landfall with Rampaging Baloth and other effects. So, if we have 7 lands in the graveyard and we cast this, we get 7 4/4s, that's 28 power instantly on the board, right? Alongside the 6/6. The more lands we have, the better it gets, right? So, again, turning the detriment of sacrificing lands into a positive. That's what this deck is doing, and this is just another example of that. Really, really good card in the deck. Good to see it reprinted. Next up, Tireless Tracker, 2 and a green, creature human scout, 3/2. This has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, investigate. That means create a clue token. Clues are 2 tap, draw a card, and you sacrifice the token. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So this grows every time we sacrifice a clue. So lots of value here. I've seen Tireless Trackers get up to 10 9s before and stuff like that. I mean, it's not that hard to do if you're building around it. Again, more landfall sprinkled in this deck, so it's always good to have ways to draw cards. So this just gives us a way to put tokens away. We can either sacrifice those tokens later for something like God Eternal Bantu, or we can actually crack them to draw cards. So good value, and eventually becomes a really, really big creature. Next up, we have Titania, Protector of Argoth. 3 green, legendary creature, elemental, 5/3. When Titania enters, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So we get to reanimate a land. And then whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 5/3 green elemental creature token. So again, this is the duality of the deck. We have the landfall to create tokens and other permanents and clues and stuff, and then we have permanents that care about lands entering the graveyard and returning land cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. So the deck is really like lands, like Jund lands matter, where there's an emphasis on sacrifice, but they've added cards to like allow the cycle to happen, right? Where we play the land, sacrifice it, return it to the battlefield, get value. And then there's stuff that cares about it getting sacrificed, get value off of that. There's stuff that cares about us just putting lands into play, we get value off of that, right? So the whole cycle of lands entering and getting sacrificed, we have cards that benefit from both of those sides of the same coin. Very, very cool. Next up we have Worldbreaker, 6 and a green. It is a creature Eldrazi 5/7. It has Devoid. When you cast this spell, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. It has a reach, and then we can pay 2 and a colorless mana, sacrifice a land, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. So we can essentially recur it back to our hand. When we cast it, we get to exile an artifact, enchantment, or land. It's actually pretty significant because there's lots of pesky, indestructible permanents that are artifacts and enchantments, like the One Ring, or Blightsteel Colossus, or something like that, right? So with this card, we can exile those, which gets around indestructible. And then I like that this can hit a land, because even though there aren't a lot of lands that are indestructible, although there are a couple, it's actually nice to get rid of some of the really problematic lands in Commander, which I'm glad Wizards is starting to pay attention to getting rid of lands. You know, like we talked about before, ramp is a problem, but also just there's some super powerful lands out there that shut down whole strategies. Like Glacial Chasm shuts down any aggressive strategy, right? So being able to exile lands like that are problematic is really, really nice to have stabled on a big body like this. Next up, Escape to the Wilds. 3 red-green. Sorcery, exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may play cards, exile this way until the end of your next turn. You may play an additional land this turn. This is one of my favorite cards. It's definitely a sleeper. I have it in my Paper Omnath deck. Any deck that cares about additional land drops, this is a great card. But even decks that don't care about that, but are in red and green colors, this is a great value card. I mean, 5 mana, draw 5 essentially, right? Now it is impulse draw, so you are going to lose the cards eventually if you don't play them. But it gives you until the end of your next turn. So not the turn you played this, but the end of the next turn. So you have a lot of time to deploy your stuff, and on the turn that you played this, you get 2 land drops, and more than likely you're going to hit a land or 2 in the top 5 cards of your deck. So, you know, let's say you hit 2 lands and 3 spells. Well, you can play the 2 lands this turn, or one of the lands this turn if you already played a land, right? You got an extra land drop. The next turn, you have a land that you can play again out of exile, right? If you don't have one in your hand. Or even if you do, you probably want to play that land so you don't lose it. And then you have 3 spells that you get to choose from that are just extra, right? In addition to the cards in your hand. So this is just a crazy good value card. Obviously good in our deck because of the lands matter strategy, but it's very, very good. So I recommend this just to like any deck that has red and green in the Commander color identity. Really, really good card. Definitely slept on. Next up we have Gaze of Granite, which is X black black green sorcery. Destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less. So effects that destroy all non-land permanents are really good in Commander. It's, you know, Wraths are good in general because they reset the board, but there's other permanents that are problematic in Commander, right? I mean, the artifacts, the enchantments, you know, the planeswalkers, like all that stuff needs to go away. And if you're going to wipe the board, you might as well get rid of all of it, right? So you really reset everything down to 0. Now, of course, that means you're going to destroy your own stuff, but if you're casting a Wrath, it means you're probably behind anyway, so resetting the board is a good thing. Now, this is interesting because it's, you know, essentially for X, right, where X is the mana value. So you can just cast this for 4 and get rid of all the 1s if you wanted to. Or you can cast it for 2 and get rid of all the 2s and 1s, right? So this gives you some flexibility. It's definitely a little mana intensive, right? Like if you wanted to get rid of all the 6 and belows, it would cost you 9 mana total to cast this. But let's be real, if you're in a situation where you need to wipe the board, like you'll pay whatever it takes, right, to wipe the board. You know, if there's a Bolas Citadel across the way, right, and you need to get rid of that and some other stuff that's 6 or less, I mean, you'll gladly pay the 9, right? So this is a good effect. It's a little mana intensive, but it is a good effect. So, and it's, you know, nice to see like a destroy all land permanent effect in colors outside of white. That's normally something that white's really good at. But it's nice to see this reprinted because this is actually one of the few ways in these colors to do that effect. Alright, up next is the Gitrog monster. This is one of the best synergy pieces in the deck. 3 black-green, legendary creature Frog Horror. It's a 6/6 with Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog monster unless you sacrifice a land. Obviously, we're going to be sacrificing lands here. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So this guy lets us draw cards every time we sacrifice a land. Now, if we sacrifice more than one in one instance, for example, if we cast Planetary Annihilation and we make everyone sack lands, including ourselves, well, we only get one draw triggered off this because it says one or more lands. However, if we sacrifice one land and then we sacrifice another land in the same turn, that's 2 different triggers for this. So as long as we're sacrificing one land at a time, we get to draw a card for every land that we sacrifice. And then the Gitrog monster forces us to sacrifice lands at the beginning of our upkeep anyway. So this card is an engine starter and a value engine provider, right? And then we get to play additional lands on each of our turns. So we already have seen how many different ways we can play additional lands. This is just another way to play additional lands on each of our turns. And as we draw cards, some of those cards are going to be lands. So, you know, like we talked about, the engine go burr, right? This is one of the best synergy pieces because it gives us value for what we want to be doing anyway. It creates a way, you know, an outlet for doing the thing that we want to be doing, and it gives us extra land drops in addition to being a 6/6 death touching creature. So really, really good card. It can be a commander because it's a legendary creature, but really, really good in this deck. Speaking of insane value in this deck, Korvold Fakehurst King, 2 black, red, green, legendary creature Dragon Noble 4/4, although it doesn't stay a 4/4 for long. Flying, whenever Korvold enters or attacks, sacrifice another permanent. So we play Korvold, we have to sacrifice something. Guess what? We're going to sacrifice a land. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. So this card gets huge, right? Now, their whole deck's built around Korvold. It's super easy to build around with like treasures or any kind of permanent that sacrifices itself. This works with fetch lands too. So anything that sacrifices triggers this. Fetch lands, treasures, clues, you know, creatures that sacrifice. All of our land sacrifice stuff. So this card's insanely good. In this deck, it's probably more tame than the average deck that Korvold is in because the rate at which we're going to be sacrificing lands is less than sacrificing 10 treasures in a turn, right? Which would trigger this 10 times, drawing 10 cards, putting 10 +1/+1 counters on it. But it's still incredible value in this deck, and it's nice to see it reprinted because this card was creeping up to like $20 or something like that. But it's incredible value in this deck, one of our best draws alongside the Gitrog monster. Next up we have Mazarek, Crawl Death Priest, 3 black-green, legendary creature Insect Shaman 2/2 with flying. Whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So in this deck, right, we don't have a ton of ways of making other people sacrifice stuff. However, players just kind of do that on their own. You know, they have their own fetch lands, they have their own little sacrifice strategies, you know, treasures we talked about. So whenever anybody sacrifices a permanent, right, whenever a player, not just us or just opponents, whenever anybody sacrifices a permanent, we put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. Kind of insane. This card is really, really good, and it kind of shuts down other people's strategies. Like if another player is playing a sacrifice deck, let's say it's a lands deck where they're using a bunch of sack lands, like fetch lands and stuff like that. Well, it makes them think about whether they actually want to fetch with those lands or sacrifice those permanents. You know, a treasure deck. Like, do you really want to sacrifice your treasures? And, you know, let's say they sacrifice 5 treasures. You're going to buff all my creatures. You're going to give them all +5/+5. And that's permanent because they're counters. It's not just for the turn or until end of turn. They're permanent +1/+1 counters, including on this creature. So it gets wild, right? And then on top of that, just us sacrificing stuff, since we're gonna have fetch lands, we're gonna have, you know, the ways of sacrificing our own lands. You know, sacrificing clues, right? We have all these different things that we can sacrifice. So, you know, this essentially, whenever someone breathes, this buffs our whole team. It's really good, really good finisher in the deck. Incredibly good, and this has flying too. So even if the ground gets gummed up, this can just fly over the top and kill someone if it gets big enough. Next up we have Omnath, Locust of Rage, 3 red, green. Definitely a commander classic. It's a legendary creature elemental 5/5 with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, create a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token, and then whenever Omnath or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to any target. So, we make a bunch of 5/5s. If any of them die, right? Let's say we make 5 5/5s, right? And then we have Omnath as well. If someone wipes the board, they have to really think about whether they want to, because if they wipe the board and they kill all of our elementals, we do 3 damage for each of those elementals to any target. So we can just send 5 times 3, well actually 6 if you include Omnath, so 6 times 3 directly to the board wipe player's face if we want to, right? We're definitely sending it somewhere other than creatures, maybe to planeswalkers or something like that if they're on the battlefield, but more than likely it's going to be at someone's face because there's nothing else to target, right? You just wipe the board. So 3 damage times however many elementals we have, I mean, that could be half or more of someone's life total. You know, if we're at the end of the game, that could be all the life they have left. So I like cards like Omnath because they make players who want to wipe the board think twice about doing it, and it gives us big creatures in the meantime. So it's like they're between a rock and a hard place. They don't, you know, really want us to keep making 5/5s, but if they wipe the board, and the longer they wait too, it gets worse. If they wipe the board, they're going to take a ton of damage to the face. So really cool card in the deck. Again, it works with all of our lands theme stuff. Alright, up next is Soul of Windgrace. 1 black, red, green, legendary creature cat avatar 5/4. Whenever Soul of Windgrace enters or attacks, you may put a land card from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control. And then we have a couple abilities here. Pay green, discard a land card, you gain 3 life. Pay 1 and a red, discard a land card, draw a card. And then pay 2 in black, discard land card. Soul of Windgrace gains indestructible until end of turn, tap it. So lots of versatile abilities there. Any number of them can come in handy in any given situation. What's nice is that on ETB, it gets us a land back out of our graveyard. And then whenever we attack with it, we get to do the same thing. And we can give it indestructible and instant speed if we want to. So, you know, we don't, you know, we're not worried about attacking with Soul of Windgrace. And then obviously if we have extra lands in our hand, we can do any of the other abilities as well. We essentially can cycle them away to draw cards or gain life. And then we can get them back with Soul of Windgrace. So he puts lands in the graveyard with his abilities and then gets them back and puts them on the battlefield. Really cool kind of self-generating engine. You can build a whole commander deck around Soul of Windgrace. There are many people out there who have used Soul of Windgrace as the face commander for their commander decks. Really good card. Definitely a nice utility piece in this deck. Allows us, like I said, to continually get lands out of our graveyard, which is really good with our strategy. Next up we have Windgrace's Judgment. 3 black, green. It's an instant. For any number of opponents, destroy target non-land permanent that player controls. So for each of our opponents, we choose 1 non-land permanent and we get to destroy that permanent. Again, it's a non-land permanent, which is a bummer. I wish it hit lands, but Wizards is very careful about what they let destroy lands, even though we're destroying our own lands. And I do wish it was for each player, because then we could target our own land and get a, sacrifice, or just, I guess it doesn't say sacrifice, it says destroy. But it would be cool if this was every player. So every player, I had to choose something, and then we all had to sacrifice those permanents. That would be really, really synergistic. But just on its own, instant speed, 5 mana, destroy 3 problematic things that my opponents control, really, really good value. So not complaining, just saying that it would be cool if it was just a tiny bit more synergistic with our deck. But good removal nonetheless. Really, really cool card. You don't see it that often in Commander, even though the card's been out there for a while. But definitely a cool card in the deck. Next up, we have World Soul's Rage for X and red-green. It's a sorcery. World Soul's Rage deals X damage to any target. Put up to X land cards from your hand and or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So this is really, really cool. We can use this to, kill a problematic creature. We can kill a planeswalker. We can blow up a battle if we want to, yada yada, because it's any target. But we also just send this straight to someone's face. So if we have enough mana, we can just burn someone out of the game. And then in addition to that, we can put that many land cards from our hand and or our graveyard onto the battlefield. It's both. It's not one or the other. It's both. So all the lands from our hand and all the lands from our graveyard. So this can like super ramp us. If we pour 10 into X and we have 2 lands in hand and 8 of our graveyard, we can put all of those lands onto the battlefield tapped. That's crazy good value. It's incredible. I would think that this kind of effect would be like an XX effect, like XX red green, but it's not. It's just a straight up X. So crazy good value, really, really versatile. We can use it early game to deal like 2 damage to something and get a land out of our hand onto the battlefield, like an extra land drop, or we can use it late game to kill someone. So really, really versatile in the deck. Really, really, really sweet value. Next up is Farseek. We should all know what this does. It is a 1 and green sorcery. Search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Notice how it doesn't say basic, so we can fetch those non-basic lands that we talked about, those ones with the dual land types. But yeah, really infamous ramp spell. Definitely part of the 2 mana green ramp package that you see in almost every single deck. Don't play it in mono green though. Don't do that to yourself. Next up we have Spring Bloom Druid, 2 and a green. Creature Elf Druid 1/1. When this creature enters, you may sacrifice a land. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this is great. I mean, it's already a good ramp spell. You don't see it that often, Commander, because people see the word sacrifice a land and instantly don't want to do it. But there are lots of effects out there that sacrifice 1 land to get you 2, and they're actually really, really good, even outside of decks that care about land sacrifice. But in this deck, it's especially good because it gives us a way to sacrifice a land and ramp. So triggers all of our land sacrifice stuff, triggers all of our landfall stuff, gives us 2 landfall triggers. Excellent card in the deck. Really good ramp option. Next up we have Binding the Old Gods. So this 2 black-green. It's a saga, which is an enchantment. If you're not familiar with sagas, I'll just briefly explain. Sagas come down and they have these lore counters, so each of these steps happens turn after turn. So turn 1 you're going to get the first effect, then on the beginning of your main phase of your next turn you'll get the second effect, and then so on and so forth with the third effect. They can come in different forms. There's ones where you can skip the steps and whatnot, but you don't need to worry about any of that. Just know that when this comes down, it gives you this first effect right away, and then you get the rest of the effects as the turns go on. And then once you get to the last effect, it sacrifices itself. So works with sacrifice decks. So the first effect on this is destroy target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Already really good. You know, 4 mana to destroy any non-land permanent is a good rate. It's kind of an average rate for that kind of effect, especially in Golgari colors here. So already worth the cost. Then on the beginning of your next turn's main phase, you get to search your library for a forest card and put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And again, it doesn't say basic, so you can go get your, you know, dual land that has both types, right? Whether it's a forest swamp or a forest mountain, whatever you need to fix your mana at the time. But this ramps you as well, and it ramps you a non-basic dual land if you go search for the right thing. And then the last mode, it hardly ever comes up, but it's not useless. It's creatures you control gain death touch until end of turn. Now, you know, I can count maybe, you know, a handful of times where I've seen this actually matter. Normally the first 2 modes matter the most, but already just with the first 2 modes, you know, 4 mana, you got a ton of value. So it's already a sweet card. But I have seen times where giving all your creatures death touch has put people in a really weird spot, because, you know, they give all their stuff death touch and then they say, all right, like, problematic player at the table, like, I'm going to attack you with all my stuff. Everything has death touch, including my 1/1 tokens and stuff. And they don't really want to block, but they also don't want to take a bajillion damage. So it puts them in a weird spot. So giving everything death touch is not a bad thing. It's just, you have to be in a specific point in the game for it to matter, depending on your deck. In this deck, you know, I could see it mattering in certain situations, but again, it's very situational. But that doesn't even matter, because the first 2 modes are super good, and the last mode is just additional value if it ever comes up, right? So destroy something that's really problematic at the table, anything except for lands, right? Can be artifact, enchantment, whatever. Creature, and then we get to ramp ourselves, and we get to ramp a non-basic, so mana fix ourselves. So really good card. And then it sacrifices, so anything in our deck that cares about non-token permanent sacrificing, this is a sacrifice trigger for that. So we essentially get 3 really solid pieces of value with this one card. Really good. Next up, we have Arcane Signet. Again, we should all know what this does. 2 mana, generic artifact, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Commander staple. Don't need to talk too much more about that. Brand new art. Otherwise, solid mana rock. Next up, we have Soul Ring. 1 mana, tap, add 2 colorless mana. Again, probably the face card of Commander. When you think of Commander, you think of Soul Ring. It's been reprinted into Oblivion. Good to see it continue to get reprinted into Oblivion. We should never have this card be over $1. So keep including it in every Precon, every Commander product. Obviously a good ramp card too, you know? Really good. Next up, we have Infernal Grasp. 1 in a black, instant, destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. Probably the best 2 mana black destroy, you know, target creature effect, because it doesn't have a condition like Doomblade where it's a non-black creature, or some of the other ones where it depends on their power and toughness, or it depends what type of creature it is. This just kills anything, and the only drawback is you lose 2 life. So probably the best version of the 2 mana black instant kill a target creature effect. So good to see it in the deck. Next up, we have Night's Whisper. 1 in a black, it's a sorcery, you draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. These types of effects are a dime a dozen in black, where you draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. This is just one of the many. Sign in Blood is another one. It would be, you know, I'm not nitpicking, I know this is a Precon, but it would be cool, instead of just having straight up draw 2, you know, it would be cool if there was like another land sacrifice type effect in here, or another landfall, or some type of synergy piece that helped us draw cards, you know. Like there was cards in that were included that there was cards that we went over before where, you know, if something was sacrificed, we drew cards, right? Or we impulse draw cards or whatever. So straight up Night's Whisper, while fine, it's, you know, it's just kind of medium in the deck. It's not really part of the synergy. And I like to go for high synergy with the decks that I build because, one, that's the most fun, two, it's the most rewarding, right? You're building a strategy. It's nice to have cards that help build or benefit off of that strategy, and Night's Whisper, you know, doesn't do that. Now, I will say that, like, there are situations where drawing a Night's Whisper after you just got wiped is kind of nice because you don't have any of your synergy pieces down, and so having a card that just, you know, it doesn't depend on anything else to draw you cards can be nice in a pinch. But in general, it's better to have a synergy piece. You know, it's better to have a higher density of synergy pieces in the deck so that if you do get board wiped, you can just play more synergy pieces versus just drawing two. Again, I know it's nitpicking, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with Night's Whisper as a card. Maybe in a Spellslinger deck that cares about instants and sorceries, this is, you know, a great card. But in this deck, I think it's a little weak. So, you know, if you're looking for stuff to swap out, this would probably be one of the things I would suggest first. Next up, we have Sprouting Goblin, 1 in a red. Creature Goblin Druid, 2/2 with Kicker. So you can pay green, and when this creature enters, if it was kicked, search your library for a land card with a basic land type, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And it has an additional ability, pay a red, tap, sacrifice a land, draw a card. So this card's been around actually for a long time. It's just never really had a home, but it's actually kind of perfect in here because you can get a land out of your deck with it. It doesn't go on the battlefield, it goes in your hand, but still, you know, with Lord Windgrace or any of those other cards, it can work well. And then, or any of the retrace effects. And then we can pay a red and tap and sack a land to draw a card. So it's decent value all around. Like I said, you know, Night's Whisper, I mean, it's interesting having these two cards juxtaposed against each other because we already talked about Night's Whisper and why it's just okay, right? But Sprouting Goblin is a really cool include in the deck because normally it's unplayable anywhere else, but in this deck it's actually pretty decent value for the 2-mana slot, right? So it would have been nice that instead of a Night's Whisper, we had like another Sprouting Goblin or something like that, because that's what the deck wants to do. It wants to sack lands for value. So again, I'm just nitpicking, but this is a good example of what I'm talking about. It'd be nice to have more of these effects versus Night's Whispers. Just saying. Next up, Aftermath Analyst, 1 in a green, creature, elf, detective. It's a 1/3. When this creature enters, mill 3 cards. That means put 3 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. And then later on, we can pay 3 in a green, sacrifice this creature, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tap. So another effect that allows us to return all of our lands in our graveyard to the battlefield. Really, really good. It's also a sacrifice effect. We sacrifice the creature to return all the lands, so that triggers all of our stuff that cares about non-token permanents being sacrificed. So that's great. Milling is not something we really want to do in this deck, but it's, you know, it's part of the card, right? So maybe we mill 3 lands. That allows us to get even more lands back on the battlefield. Really, really cool card in the deck, and definitely in other strategies, you know, other decks, this is a really sought after card. So great reprint. Next up, we have Beast Within, another commander staple, 2 in a green, instant destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. So green's version of, you know, permanent removal. It does say target permanent, so it can hit lands, which is sweet. The downside is we give whatever opponent we hit with this a 3/3 green beast, but, you know, taking out, you know, we've talked about Pulse's Citadel, or, you know, a problematic land like a Cabal Coffers, you know, Aetherflux Reservoir, anything that's gonna win the game essentially. It's nice to have an instant speed way to get rid of that. Next up we have Cultivate, 2 and a green, sorcery, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put one on the battlefield tapped and the other in your hand. Great way to mana fix in 3 or higher colored decks, you know, because we can, you know, if we have too many of one color, we can go get 2, you know, one of the color we're missing and one of the other color we're missing, put one on the battlefield, one in our hand, gives us a land drop for the next turn, or with some of our extra land drop effects allows us to play that land directly out of our hand. So Cultivate is solid. It's not the best ramp effect, but it's a very, very solid for what it does, and it has not lost its value over time. Next up we have Groundskeeper. For 1 green, it's a creature, human druid, 1/1. We can pay 1 and a green, return target basic land card from your graveyard to your hand. So a way to recur basic lands from our graveyard. We can't put them directly on the battlefield, but we can put them in our hand, and we can replay those lands, get extra land drops, you know, try to get extra value that way. Next up, Harrow, 2 and a green. It's an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a land. So it triggers our land sack stuff. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, and then shuffle. Now again, it doesn't say tapped. So Harrow's kind of cool because you can play it at instant speed, so you can play it at your end step, and then, you know, the lands don't come into play tapped, right? Or you can do it on your turn, and since the lands don't come into play tapped, you kind of get the mana back. You spent 3 mana, you went down a land, hopefully that land was tapped, you already got the mana out of it, and then you get 2 lands back on the battlefield that are untapped. So it's a very cool card, and if you play at the right time, you actually get a lot of value out of it. Again, 2 more landfall triggers. Just like the Spring Bloom Druid, we get, you know, to sacrifice a land and ramp, so extra value that way on both sides. Really cool include. Next up, Nature's Lore, nice reprint, 1 and a green. Search your library for a forest card, put the card on the battlefield, then shuffle. This is an old card, but it's probably one of the best ramp cards that green offers, because for 2 mana you can get any forest. Again, not a basic, you can get any forest, so that can be a dual land, a triome, whatever, right? As long as it has the forest land type. And then you put it on the battlefield, and it doesn't come into play tapped. It just says put it on the battlefield. So, you know, if the land itself says it comes into play tapped, like a surveil land or a triome or something like that, then it obviously still comes into play tapped. But any land that, you know, has a way to come into play untapped, like a shock land, you can just go get your shock land and shock it in, and it comes into play untapped. So incredible ramp effect. Most 2 mana ramp effects make the land come into play tapped, but this one does not. Next up we have Roiling Regrowth, 2 and a green, sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Similar effect to Harrow, except the lands come into play tapped. Womp womp. But it's essentially the same thing. It's also instant speed, so you know, you can do it on your end step or whenever. It doesn't necessarily matter, but it gives you the flexibility like that. And it gives us a land sacrifice trigger as well as 2 landfall triggers. So again, dual value that way. Really good card. Next up, Cedh Wayfinder, 1 and a green, creature Cedh, 1/1. When this creature enters, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. So this is actually a card that you used to see in Dredge a lot, but you know, we mill 4 cards, and then we put a land card from among the milled cards into our hand and the rest into our graveyard. Not sure how synergistic it is with the deck. Obviously it turns on some of our strategies, like the stuff that cares about lands being in the graveyard. If we mill 4 lands, that's probably best case scenario with this card, because then we get to choose one of those lands, you know, whatever the best one is, put it into our hand, and then fill our graveyard with lands. But you know, another card that might be worth cutting if we're talking about Precon upgrades, because it's not really that synergistic with the deck, but you know, it's here, so there you go. Next up, Sky Shrouded Claim, 3 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 forest cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So just like Nature's Lore, but times 2. It's literally Nature's Lore times 2. So 2 forests, they come into play untapped. So if you have a way to get 2 forests, like a Cinder Glade and one of the other ones that cares about basics, and they come into play untapped, then you can ramp 2 dual lands and have them come into play untapped. Pretty incredible. So really good reprint. This is another old OG card. Good to see it reprinted here. Next up we have Terra Sunder, really versatile removal spell. So for 1 and a green, it's an instant. We can exile target artifact or enchantment, and then it has a kicker of 1 and a black. If this spell was kicked, exile target non-land permanent instead. So exile an artifact or enchantment. If we kick it, we pay 4 mana total. We get to exile a target non-land permanent. So really versatile. A lot of the times just exiling a artifact or enchantment at instant speed is really good. But in a pinch, you can exile a non-land permanent. I wish this was a just target permanent. I feel like for 4 mana you should be able to exile any permanent, but it's all good. Non-land permanent still hits 99% of the stuff we care about in the game of Commander. So, and having it exiled means it's gone forever. So really good removal spell. Alright, next up we have Jury, Master of the Review. It is a Rakdos commander, black and red, legendary creature, human shaman, 1/1. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Jury. And then when Jury dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So we're going to be sacrificing a lot of stuff. If we get this down early, we can easily put 10 or more counters on it. And then what's awkward is that, people want to get rid of this, but in order to get rid of this, they have to kill it. And then if we kill it, the damage goes right to their face. It's kind of like the Omnath thing that we talked about, where it puts them between a rock and a hard place. So I love effects like this. And then since this deck is going to be sacrificing so many things, not just lands, but, tokens and clues and things like that, the Jury can get really big if we play them early. And it creates a really awkward situation for our opponents where, like I said, they need to get rid of it, but they kind of have to have like an exile effect or something like that. That's really the only thing that I can think of, or maybe like a phase out effect, like a oubliette or something, that keeps this from killing them on the death trigger. So really cool card in the deck. It also is just it becomes a huge creature. So even without the threat of it dying, if we just start attacking people with a 15/15 or a 20/20, that also sucks for them. So I love this card because it really puts pressure on our opponents in multiple different ways. Next up we have Mayhem Devil, 1 black-red creature devil. It's a 3/3. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, this player deals 1 damage to any target. We kind of mentioned Mayhem Devil earlier, so this is one of those, really cool effects that cares about anyone sacrificing a permanent, right? Which, treasures, fetch lands, our opponents will be sacrificing in an average game of Commander a fair amount of things. So whenever they do that, we get to ping whatever we want for 1 damage, right? So, if they, crack 3 treasures, then all of a sudden we have 3 damage triggers on the stack. We could kill their commander, or we could just send it straight at their face. We get to choose. And then obviously as we sacrifice stuff, this triggers, and we get to send that damage wherever we want. So this is definitely one of the more powerful synergy pieces in the deck. It's an incredible card. It's in every single Rakdos, plus sacrifice deck that I own. I really wish they would make this a commander. It doesn't have to be 3 mana, but they can make like a 6 mana version of this that's a 3/3 with the same ability, and I would definitely play that as my commander. It's just so good. But great card in its own right, great include in the deck. Next up, Putrefy, 1 black-green, instant, destroy target artifact or creature, it can't be regenerated. Regenerated is just an old term, essentially meant like it wouldn't die, right? If you regenerated a creature, you tapped it and it didn't die, the next time it would die. Kind of a outdated keyword, but some stuff still has it on there. But essentially all you need to know is this destroys an artifact or creature, so it's a versatile removal spell. And then if it has the ability to be regenerated, it can't be regenerated. Next up, Rakdos Charm, black and a red, one of the best modal spells ever printed. So it's an instant, we get to choose one, exile target player's graveyard, destroy target artifact, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So each of these modes is good in any particular given situation, right? If you're playing against a graveyard deck, you have to have a way to get rid of their graveyard. Otherwise, you know, graveyard decks are super scary if the graveyard's not dealt with. So having a way to deal with that is awesome, especially at instant speed. Destroy target artifact. There's a million artifacts out there that are problematic. Again, we keep talking about Pulse Citadel. It's just the first one I think of when I think about super scary artifacts. So this can blow that up. And then the last mode is my favorite. Each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So, you know, if you're playing against a token deck or any deck with lots of creatures, this can just straight up kill them. It can just kill them for 2 mana, because if they have 40 tokens and you cast this, that's 40 damage that their own creatures deal to their face, right? And since our deck isn't like really high in creature count, it has creatures, but it's not super high. This will more than likely not hurt us as bad as it hurts our opponents. So the last effect on there, while it reads kind of weird, is actually incredibly, incredibly powerful. And then we have Urg, I think that's how you say it, Spawn of Turg, right? Urg? I don't know. We're just going to call it Urg. Urg, Spawn of Turg. It rhymes. Black, green. Legendary creature Frog Beast with an X5 power and toughness. So Urg's power is equal to the number of land cards in your graveyard. Again, another card that cares about lands being in our graveyard. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1. So if we want to, we can start filling our graveyard with lands with this card, or just surveil away stuff that we don't want. And then for green and a black, we sacrifice a land, we gain 2 life. Not a bad rate, especially compared to some of the other cards where it was like 3 mana or 4 mana to do the same thing, right? So 2 mana is a little bit more acceptable. But this creature can obviously get super big, at least the power can, right? Because the power can change. And just the ability to surveil on our upkeep is really, really nice, because that's before we draw. So we get to surveil. Do we want to keep that card? Yes, no. We either put it in our graveyard, keep it on top, and then we draw. So nice little value piece there. And that's all the non-lands in the deck. So I'm just going to put these off to the side over here. Let's put the face commander on top. It's just so beautiful. Let's get a nice little close-up one last time. Really beautiful card. Really good foiling. Also, notice it is not pringled. It is very, very flat. I think Wizards has improved. Same with this this foil in the back here for Sazerel. However you say that. It is not pringled at all. That is super flat. Incredibly flat. So I think, you know, like I was about to say, Wizards has improved their foiling process, and they are not printing, at least in Precon packs, Pringle foils anymore. So that's awesome. These are the lands. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over them. I'll just lay them out here. So we got Canyon Slough, Cinder Glade, Carplosian Forest, I don't know how to say that, Llanowar Wastes, Sheltered Thicket, Smoldering Marsh. Here's a couple of those lands I was talking about where they, you know, they cycle, where they have dual types, or they care about basics and have dual types. So these ones have existed for a while, but the Golgari ones we talked about earlier did not. Those are new. Sulphur Spring, Twilight Mire, Verdescent Bog, Command Tower, Mountain Valley, it's like a slow fetch land, Terramorphic Expanse, Bojuka Bog, exile someone's graveyard, Cabaretti Courtyard, Dakmor Salvage, one of the cooler lands in the deck. It's a land that enters tapped and just taps for a black, but has dredge too. So we can return it on its own from the graveyard to our hand if we dredge it for 2, which is cool. Escape Tunnel, Evolving Wilds, Maestro's Theater. I'm running out of room here. Myriad Landscape, Riveteer's Overlook, Rocky Tar Pit, Oasis, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swamps, 1, 2, 3 mountains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 forests to complete the deck. And then we have some tokens that they provided. So we have some beasts and some insects and a couple copies. And then on the back, we have pests, clue, golem, another beast, elemental, Omnath elemental, another elemental, another pest, and a lander. So that is your first look at an actual lander token. This is the Rampant Growth token that we talked about, but these are super cool. I'm super glad that they made these, and it's cool that they printed them on cards that aren't necessarily all green cards. Like, I've seen this effect on red cards and some other effects that produce these that aren't green. I think being able to ramp outside of green is important, and ramping lands is the best way to ramp. So them creating a ability that allows other colors to ramp, you know, even though it's a little bit slower than what you would get in green, which is totally fine, that's fair, but it still gives them a way to do it, is awesome. So I'm 1000% on board with lander tokens. They'll probably be in all my decks from now on. But here is an actual lander token that they include. And then what else we got in here? On your turn. Oh, this just goes over the phases, right? Popular Magic formats, talks about standard and draft and commander. I think you're forgetting about Legacy, Vintage, Modern, Brawl. Just kidding. Yeah, cool little info card there. Yeah, I think we went over all these. Yeah, so that's the whole Precon. Very, very cool. Let me just clean up a little bit and I'll go over the cards that I'm most excited about. So there are lots of cards in this Precon that I'm excited about, but I wanted to go over the new cards because, you know, I talked about all the different cards and you can tell by my excitement level, you know, which ones I like the most. Some of them are reprints. Obviously, like Corvold itself is really, really powerful in the deck, but it's not a new card. You know, Lord Eternal Bantu is not a new card, but it's also really, really good. Braids, similar thing. So these are the 6 that I pulled out that I thought I was most excited about. Obviously, the Face Commander Hearthhull is super cool. Even as a card in the 99 in some of their deck, I think it's really cool if you're doing a Jund sacrifice strategy. I have another Jund sacrifice deck, so this will probably end up in there. But this is just such a sweet card, right? The 2 station abilities are both good. The ability for it to become a flying, vigilant, hasty 6/7 is great. You know, being able to sacrifice lands to draw cards and to get an additional land drop on that turn is really, really cool. So very excited about the face commander. Really excited about Satsarel, Genesis Shepherd. Being able to, you know, play land cards from your graveyard is an awesome ability. And then, you know, whenever you sacrifice another non-token permanent, put them in +1/+1 counters equal to its power on another target creature is good additional value. Again, this, you know, they were clever. They said non-token permanent, so you can't do the treasure thing with this, but that's okay, because I think the whole, you know, I have a sacrifice deck and I'm just going to sacrifice a bunch of treasures for value is kind of played out. That whole that thing was cool 4 or 5 years ago when people first figured that out, but now it's kind of like, oh great, the treasure player is sacrificing their treasures to make mana and get a bunch of sacrifice triggers. Like it's kind of played out. It's not cool or unique anymore. It's kind of just overpowered, and it wasn't designed that way. That's why you see a lot of cards now printed that make treasures. The treasures come into play tapped. That way the treasures you can't sacrifice them right away for value, but they are permanents that they can be sacrificed to trigger a lot of different stuff, including like Mayhem Devil and things like that, but they can't trigger these new cards. And I kind of like that, because, you know, while that's objectively worse, that makes the game more fun. It means you have to build around these a little bit harder. You can't just like throw a bunch of treasure creators in there and call it a day. You have to like throw real permanents in there, otherwise you're not going to get any value off these cards. And lands are non-token permanents, so in, you know, this deck it works really well with, you know, sacrificing lands to, you know, trigger the non-token permanent clause. But even in other Jund sacrifice decks, this is still really good, whether you're playing a Jund like creature sacrifice deck, or which there are plenty of with different face commanders, or you're, you know, playing a deck that cares about sacrificing a bunch of different kinds of permanents in these colors. This card's really, really good. And then obviously just being able to play lands, even a deck that doesn't care about lands as a general strategy, being able to play your fetch lands out of your graveyard is incredibly good. So I'm very excited about Satsarel as a commander, because it can be a commander and a card in the 99. We talked a lot about Horizon Explorer and how I think this card might be the best card in the Precon and will be very sought after. So lands entering untapped is an incredible ability. It's also not a very common ability, so it's definitely something that is good value and not something you're going to see very often. And then in conjunction with whenever you attack a player, create a lander token, I think this card just has the right amount of good stuff going on. It's great on curve too. It's 3 mana. It's a 2/4, so it can block real well. It allows, you know, lands to enter untapped, which also means that the lands you fetch with your lander tokens, right? Because it fetches basic lands and puts them on the battlefield tapped, but those now come into play untapped because you have the ability to have your lands enter untapped. So as long as it stays on the battlefield and you're attacking a player, and again, this says whenever you attack a player, so if you attack all your opponents in your attack steps, I believe you get this triggered 3 times, because it doesn't say whenever you attack one or more players or whenever you attack. It says whenever you attack a player, which to me, you know, that means that if I attack one player, that's one trigger. If I attack a different player, that's another trigger. And if I attack another player, that's a different trigger. So every turn you can be making 3 lander tokens. And if you have the mana, you can crack them and have those lands come into play untapped with this creature. It's just super good in Commander. So I think this is going to be a, you know, I don't know if it's going to be a green Commander staple, but it's definitely going to be a Commander staple for the archetypes that it supports. And any deck that wants to create tokens or ramp or, you know, have lands enter untapped, you know, which I think honestly, arguably most decks want all those things, this card's going to be good in. So excited for Horizon Explorer as well. Evendo Brushrazer is super cool. Again, for the same reasons that Satsarel is, where it cares about non-token permanents being sacrificed. So any deck that can support red and sacrifices non-token permanents Lots of Rakdos Aristocrats decks. You know, they're sacrificing actual creatures, not just tokens and stuff. Like they care about this. This is great card advantage for those types of decks, and it's a really cool take on Impulse Draw, where it does exile the card, and it allows you to play it later, but it doesn't go away after a turn or two. As long as this creature is on the battlefield, you can play those cards, as long as you've sacrificed a non-token permanent that turn, which again, in any deck that's running this, that's going to be something they're going to be doing pretty often. So great value engine. And then it has the ability to sacrifice lands right on there. It's one of the best ones too. You just tap and sacrifice a land. That's probably the best rate. I mean, even the commander, you have to pay 1. So really great ability in a deck that doesn't care about sacrificing lands. This still gives you an ability that allows you to trigger itself, right? It creates the card advantage and allows you to trigger the thing that creates the card advantage. And then it makes up for it by adding 2 red to your mana pool. So even though you sacrifice the land, you get some mana back. It is temporary, but as you know, red decks know that red operates in the land of temporary. That is red's thing. I want value now for advantage now, and I will deal with the detriments later, right? So that's a very red ability. But in our deck, it's incredible because we'll sacrifice a land and add some mana, then draw some cards and play some extra land drops, and it all just becomes a super cool, functional synergistic deck. So excited about this card as well. Next up we have Exploration Broodship, which we talked about. So the 1 mana mono green spacecraft, where we can play an additional land on each of our turns if we get it stationed to 3, or if we station it to 8, we can play permanents out of our graveyard. Just a really good card in any deck that is gonna have stuff in the graveyard. Obviously sacrifice decks, by nature of sacrificing stuff, put stuff in the graveyard. So really this is good in any deck that is sacrificing things. And then the ability to play extra lands on each of our turns is really good. We have at least 4, 5, 6, maybe more abilities like that in this deck. So having an additional one just makes it more and more likely that we'll be able to actually do that, or even stack them up in any given game that we play this deck. So this is an incredible value card for multiple different reasons, but really good. Nonetheless, excited about this card, and see how it plays when we actually play this deck. And then last up, but definitely not least, is Planetary Annihilation. So we went over this. This particular card isn't necessarily really good, but it's definitely not bad. I'm just excited that they're printing this stuff in main commander precons, because it signals to the commander community. And again, remember, Wizards now runs the rules committee. This changed about a year ago. It used to be run by the commander RC, but some wonky stuff happened, and Wizards took it over. If you want to read about that, it's all online. I don't really want to go over it here, but Wizards now controls the rule panel for Commander, when before they did not. And so printing stuff like this in the main Commander products is a signal to the Commander community that this is the type of stuff that is okay, right? They do it all the time with other things without saying it as well. Like, we talked about how a lot of the removal in this deck, it can target non-land permanents, which I think is a little weak, but they're signaling, by doing that, they're signaling to the commander community that like targeting lands is something that's going to cost you a lot of mana if you're going to do it, right? They tend to allow it in like the 6, 7, 8 mana range, right? Once you get into there, they're okay with it, but anything below that, they don't really like to put that effect on stuff, even though in Magic's history it was really common in the early history of Magic. They just don't want to print those effects anymore. So that tells the commander community, okay, well, like targeting lands and blowing them up is like kind of a little taboo unless you're doing it later in the game, right? When you have 6, 7, 8, 8+ mana. However, the same thing works in the inverse with stuff like this, where they're saying, hey, at 5 mana, you can make everyone sacrifice all but 6 lands. That's totally cool, right? and then, you know, kill all their creatures with 6 damage to each creature. But the main thing here is the you know, making everyone balance back down to 6 lands. That's a big step. That's a big deal to me. You know, not that I like particularly care what Wizards thinks about how to play Commander. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that they have obviously thought about this, and when they printed a brand new card that has this specific ability, which means they had to think long and hard about what number. Was it 5? Was it 7? And they landed on 6, right? They had to figure out, well, what mana cost is that? Is it like 10 mana? Is that a 10 mana effect? Is that a 7 mana effect? Is that a 6 mana? No, it's a 5 mana effect, right? So what they're saying is that we're going to be printing more of this stuff. You should be aware of that, right? This is something that we think is totally fine in a bracket 2 game. Bracket 2. So if you're playing higher power level than that, right? Since this, you know, this is a Precon, bracket 2, then stuff that does even harsher stuff than this, but is in the same ballpark, you know, where everyone sacrifices lands down to the same amount, is okay. And I think that's good. I think this is probably the best response to ramp decks, because again, most decks on turn 5 aren't going to care about this at all. It won't even affect them, right? But that ramp player that's got twice as many lands as everyone else is going to feel the pain of this. And even on turn 7, when everyone has 7 lands except for the ramp player, I mean, they have to sacrifice 1 land, okay, but the ramp player has to sacrifice 7, right? Because they have like double the amount as everyone. You know, they're gonna, just like with a board wipe where they blow up all the creatures, you know, they're gonna see the importance of this when they're facing down the shotgun barrel of the Simic value engine, right? And if it doesn't get stopped, they're just gonna lose. Well, this cuts them down to size, and I think I'm just excited to see more of these effects continue to get printed. I'm very excited that they printed it in red too, right? Because it would have been really easy to print this in white. It would have made a lot of sense to print it in white, but I'm excited that they printed it in red, because I think red is the color of land destruction, right? It has been historically through Magic's history. White has kind of like been like the catch-all for like destroying anything, and I think that's kind of you know, it's what white does, but it's also a little bland and unfocused, right? White can just like anything that gets destroyed or sacrificed, white can do. But historically, making people sacrifice lands is something that red has done very consistently through the course of Magic's history, and I'm glad that they gave this effect to red. It makes me very happy as someone who plays a lot of red. So those are my thoughts on the new Edge of Eternities World Shaper Precon Commander deck. But I want to know, what do you think about the deck? Leave me a comment down below. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. If you want to join the channel Discord to talk with other members of the community, link is in the video description. As always, I appreciate you watching. See you guys in the next one. Later.